We'll go ahead and just kick into gear as we get this running. All right. In theory, we're kicked into gear. Not sure if that's really how it works, but we're going to find out. Let's see. Let's see. All right. Let's get this in order. All right. We're going to have a handful of people joining. I'll give everyone a moment sort of to kick in theory. My computer's making odd noises, which is always frustrating. Just waiting for something to fail. That's okay. We'll survive it. Yeah, that should be fine. All right. So, today we're going to continue Anti-Oedipus. Welcome to the Deleuze and Guattari Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus as we continue to make our way through the whatever it is, ultimately, that is capitalism, the new socius, the new setup, the way that we find ourselves, not just finding representation, but how production operates in the modern world. And it's production at both the unconscious and the conscious level. So it's going to be a lot. It is a lot. It will continue to be a fucking lot. As we make our way through, don't hesitate to drop a question, drop a note. No one has a clue what's going on here except for people who aren't here. So feel free to ask and we'll make our way through. Really, I'm just going to kind of dive in. Unless anyone has a note or a comment for me to start, that's kind of where I'm at. So, kind of just want to get to this shit and get moving, personally. So we'll see what we can do. All right. Well, then with that, we'll make our way through. There results, finally, a fourth characteristic that places the axiomatic in opposition to codes. I should have an opening. Capitalism has a lot of different parts to it. Anti-Oedipus breaks down very much all the different sort of minor parts, major parts, but the way things operate work in kind of two ways. Capitalism focuses primarily on rates of change, the differential of things. Again, it's not about businesses making a constant profit. It's actually not the big deal. It's about businesses making consistent growth, that the rate of change is constantly positive. But this doesn't affect only business. This idea that it affects only business is part of the trick. One of the things capitalism also does as it operates is it breaks down the codes of old. Codification of old was the way that very particular setups were socially coded and set up as codes. This woman would be in this position within this part of society. This guy would be a blacksmith, and here's what a blacksmith did. All of these things this is the nature of the codification. But capitalism eats codes, basically. It deterritorializes. It tears them apart. It decodes. But it doesn't do that alone. It's not like it's only simply decoding. The nature of decoding is another process. So with decoding comes axiomatization. The way axiomatization works is it basically utilizes how representation operates, how the system works, how production presumes an end, and it uses that end, the axiomatized thing, in order to define and condition everything leading up to it. We've been going through a handful of characteristics of axiomatization. I would suggest, if you want, go back and re-listen. There's a lot there. We've spent the last few weeks to sort of understand what it means by axiomatization. And it's a lot. But it's slowly dawning on me how important this entire section is really to Deleuze. And this is his thing. Like this is so bled into everything he's done. It's hard for me to think otherwise. It's kind of amazing. But with that, I will read, and we'll make our way through the fourth characteristic, and we will reread. Good Lord. Why is it so? It shouldn't be this big on screen. 1 second. There. All right. Their results, finally. Is it watch on YouTube and have chat open here? If I do it, you can just, if you mute me, you can actually mute me in Discord. So you just right-click me and do, like, mute or whatever. It'll mute only for you. It should mute only for you. And if you can't do that, I'm not sure. You should be able to do that, though. Their results, finally, a fourth characteristic that places the axiomatic in opposition to codes. The axiomatic does not need to write in bare flesh to mark organs and bodies, nor does it need to fashion a memory for man. In contrast to codes, the axiomatic finds in its different aspects its own organs of execution, perception, and memorization. Memory has become a bad thing. Above all, there is no longer any need of belief, and the capitalist is merely striking a pose when he bemoans the fact that nowadays no one believes in anything anymore. Language no longer signifies something that must be believed. It indicates rather what is going to be done, something that the shrewd or the competent are able to decode, to half understand. Moreover, despite the abundance of identity cards, files, and other means of control, capitalism does not even need to write in books to make up for the vanished body markings. Those are only relics, archaisms with a current function. The person has become private in reality, insofar as he derives from abstract quantities and becomes concrete in the becoming concrete of the same quantities. It is these quantities that are marked, no longer the persons themselves, your capital or your labor capacity. The rest is not important, will always find a place for you within the expanded limits of the system, even if an axiom has to be created just for you. There's no longer any need of a collective investment of organs, as they are sufficiently filled with the floating images constantly produced by capitalism. To pursue a remark of Henri Lefebvre's, these images do not initiate a making of public of the private, so much as a privatization of the public. The whole world unfolds right at home without one's having to leave a TV screen. This gives private persons a very special role in the system, a role of application, no longer of implication in a code. The hour of Oedipus draws nigh. Say, JK, we're getting closer. I promised JK, I think 3 chapters ago, that we would be getting to Oedipus, but we're not there yet. The hour draws nigh. You see, they're even writing for you at this point, JK. They're even writing for you at this point. They're like, trust me, we're getting there. We're getting to Oedipus. This is actually a really big one. It's the reason they mention it. So, they're continuing to discuss, why does capitalism not have a new unique type of coding? That's the question. Why is it not that we just have we had coding and then the despot came along and overcoded. He wrote over old codes with new. Why doesn't capitalism do a coding thing? Well, because it works in opposition. See, codes, they're fascinating, but they are very strict and open. They're very particular. Capital doesn't really want that or need that. The way that the axiomatic works, the way that language now works, it's no longer about, as they say, implication. The implication of a woman in a particular place having a specific tattoo in a tribe that's a gourd. Oh, she's fertile and belongs to this man over here. This guy does this thing. The coded natures of things, it's not quite as necessary. The only thing that matters to the system at large is what is your labor capacity and what is your capital capacity. There's the only 2 things. We went through this earlier. The nature of Marx. Marx talks about this. Is the nature of what he called industrial, what we'll call constant capital, and the nature of labor capital, the value of labor, the power of labor. This is how everything is determined in our society, whether we want to consider it or not. And as such, it's really the only thing that they care out of you, too. What is your capital capacity or labor capacity? Can you work? How much can you work? What kind of work can you do? What is the ability for your labor to be valuable, and how much can it be exploited? Or how much, if you can't be exploited because your labor is worthless, let's say you're Elon Musk, at the other side, how much money do you have? How much capital do you have to invest into the system, and how much capital can you bring in? That's it. You are those two things. Nothing else matters. We like to think it does, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. It is these quantities that are marked, no longer the persons themselves. The rest is not important. We'll find a place with you within the limits of the system, even if an axiom must be created. Even if capital, you find a weird way to be a weird thing, capital will find a way to include you in the system, whether that's an asylum of old or a disability check in a trailer park now that's left alone to die or to be left where they are. I'm in a more rural area, and as our schools are failing, are failing everywhere in America. America's really falling apart. It's pretty amazing, actually. But at the same time that schools are falling apart, in rural areas, it's much more brutal because there's a lot more homeschooling. And so as there's more homeschooling, there's an extremely larger amount of, one sec, I need to mute a Discord so I can keep doing this. Apologies, everyone. There, and we'll squeeze you back in. As more are homeschooled, because people don't trust the school system, because the religious or whatever political nightmare, stupid shit they believe in, whatever it may be, schools get less money. And so we have, in the area I live in, was famous for a handful of disability schools, because it was a kind of a magnet area. People would come here if they had kids who had special needs. And now it's just simply not there. School, they're just not going to be able to afford it, flatly. And so there's going to be this weird play of, well, what do we do with these kids? Well, capitalism finds a way. Don't worry. Like, horrifyingly so. I don't mean that in like the hopeful life finds a way. I mean it more in the Jurassic Park, life finds a way to become dinosaurs and eat us. Instead what's happening is they're starting to see more charter schools that are focused on special needs that are horrifying. They're not credited. There's not anything alongside them. It's a nightmare. But they will find a place, because all that matters ultimately is, can you contribute and how in one of these two ways? It's a really unique way that this interacts, because this process, as they're describing it here, is the privatization of the self, the privation of the self. This is not about I know I've gotten comments recently on the YouTube. This is not about whether or not you have a right to privacy. This is not the silly conversations at that point. This is much, much deeper. It's a question of you as you exist and your relationship with the social world, and how much of that is you believe within yourself or within your community and other people, how you regard other people, how you consider that, all of these things. This setup changes how you deal with all of it. As they say, there's no longer a need of a collective investment of organs. They are sufficiently filled with floating images constantly produced by capitalism. The organs are the productive parts of yourself and other things, and the way that you deal with people socially, how you connect. But we don't have a need for that any longer. We don't. We splurge Twitch, TV. The images of capitalism are made massive. And we get sort of fucked up on a lot of things. People talk about Twitter being the public square. It is not. It's not. That's really, really stupid. And very much this is Lefebvre's line. These images do not initiate a making public of the private, as fascists say, but instead a privatization of the public. The image becomes yours. You then have to apply it, not deal with the implications of it. The implications of it is a greater social things. The application of it is a private thing. They're going to be getting into that, don't worry. But here is where we start seeing application, which is one of the final paralogisms they haven't mentioned, and a big one. And also notice, kind of core to capitalism as a core function. This is the setup, the play that we're making now to start introducing application in this final paralogism. I think it's the final one before we get to Oedipus at last. So yeah, it's dealing with everything, but this isn't really about the privatization of schools directly. It's not about privatization of prisons directly. This is about the privation of experience, the privation of you and yourself, that you're no longer dealing with the implications socially of what you see. You're now dealing with the application of it, what a thing means to you, and the placement of it. This is a horrifying nightmare, to be perfectly frank, but it is where we exist and how we sort of are. A lot of tragedies. A lot of tragedies are public school, healthcare, governance in general, I would say, as a thing. Private prisons. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. But that private. This is about you. It's about how you deal with the private. We'll continue because it's a solid point that they carry forward here. Because it's a kind. Oh, go for it, JK. Oh, give me 2 seconds. Give me. But real quick, JK. Just give me 2 seconds. It's the audio's not capturing, so give me 2 seconds. I want to make sure that we actually have it. We'll try that. We'll see if that works. JK, can you say hello for me? That it did not work at all. Actually, I'm really terrible today. Let's see.
No voice.
There. Now we got it. All right.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Give me a good ramble.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so when you talk about privatization, it is mainly talking about the privatization of what was before public schools, public services, and prisons and so forth. Those are originally provided by it was a public domain, whereas it was funded and provided by the government. But now it's become a business, right? A privatization means a business, where everything operates as a business. Charter schools are a business, and so forth. Is that what they mean by privatization then?
Not here. Here, well, so it follows on. I will say it follows on. So it's more a resultant. That's more the effect. They're talking about the actual paralogism psychologically that's causative of what is doing this to us. So the paralogism of application is a thing we probably should sort of dive into. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to pick up my favorite version of this just really quick. We'll pull out good old Holland, who's always kind of nice to sort of have when you talk about this shit. Let's see, application. Because this is the conjunctive paralogism, which is a lot to sort of go through. But it's kind of the big deal. So let's revisit the paralogism. Paralogism as a concept, for those who are sort of joining us a little bit more mid sort of reading, the setup goes like this. The syntheses of production that make you, that you are the productive process. The misuse of this, the invalid use of this is a paralogism in line with the way Kant talked about it. As you come to experience the world, as the world produces you, it's not so much that you have a faulty reasoning, it's that the process of reasoning itself is faulty. So when you have a thought, the thought is the result of this process, and as such, it's faulty because the process itself is broken. The paralogism of application, very, very specifically, is in the conjunctive. It's at the very end. This is, again, why it shows up in capitalism. It's the process of sort of the growth of the syntheses, as has happened so far every single time. But also with this, it's a very, very particular use. There's a lot of ways to sort of talk about it. The very simple way, give me 2 seconds. I want to see if I can find a paragraph that doesn't talk about Lacan, because I really fucking don't want to get into Lacan today. I've got a video coming that talks about him, and I really don't want to deal with it. Two seconds, sorry. We're just gonna have to go backwards because he spends the whole time talking about Lacan, because it does come through Lacan, and I really am just not interested today. I'm just super not interested in Lacan today. Apologies. It's just not where my brain is going to be or is set up. So we are going to instead go straight back to the Oedipal operation. This is where they sort of go through this. Page, for those wondering, page 101. Just moving over. The Oedipal operation consists in establishing a constellation of biunivocal relations between agents of social production, reproduction, and anti-production on one hand, and agents of a so-called natural reproduction of the family on the other. This process, this operation, is called an application. It is as if tablecloth were being folded, as if its 4 plus n corners were reduced to 3 plus 1 to designate a transcendent factor performing the operation. We'll get to that. From the moment, it is a foregone conclusion that collective agents will be interpreted as derivative of or substitutes for parental figures in a system of equivalence that rediscovers everywhere father, mother, and ego. When we look out into the world, when we talk of things, and this is just built into how we talk of things, it's built into how we consider things. The way we make choices on, and again, the process, not personal choices, not cognitive choices. The way we see things, the way we understand them, is as derivatives of other pieces, as if the idea is being applied to the world and is being applied sort of in a way that presumes the other thing is a part of another thing. Every one of you and me and this process and everything we're going through is a multitude of productive processes that are almost impossible for us to know. Really, there's just, you don't know my reasons for doing things. You don't know why you joined. Really, we don't have any clue why anyone's here or what's going on. But because of the social production that we have been built into politically, historically, and socially, mostly through our parents, a lot through society, we have learned to apply these very, very basic rules to everything in order to simplify it, to castrate it, to give it a name, and then crush it. This thing that happens, this process of application, they use the term the tablecloth, a tablecloth being folded. The fold is a deep and important thing to Deleuze. The work he did with Leibniz in his book, The Fold, Leibniz and the Fold. Everything really for Deleuze revolves around this very particular misapplication, misuse of the syntheses. The ability for us to see, well, this derives from this huge chain of things. This is part of this larger setup. This is this simplified thing that we've given a name, a whole body. We've crushed all the potential around it. Instead, it's that thing. This is the nature of where privation starts. I am Brooks, white, male, suburban, American, blah, blah, whatever labels you want to place. Every one of those things crushes the potential for what I can be, not only to you, but also to myself and to other people. You do it to yourself, we do it to everyone. This privation, this is the privation, by the way, puts everything where I'm the one outwardly applying. I am doing the application. So are you, so is everyone. We're applying everything. This is how this part of the process operates. Does that make sense as a thing itself? To read a little bit further, there we have a faulty use of the conjunctive synthesis leading to the statement, so it was your father, so it was your mother. It is not at all surprising that only afterward is it discovered that all of this was the father and mother, since it is assumed to be the case from the beginning, but is subsequently forgotten, repressed, though still subject to later rediscovery, to more recent developments. They're referring to the nature of sort of Freud's, oh yes, no, you are having trouble with your boss? That's obviously the father. That's your father and the issues you have with your father. Because your father is ultimately about authority. And the way that your father is applied to everything in your life, or the way everything in your life can be applied to the father, kind of works both ways. This setup creates a world that you can know and that is symbolized, that has signification in a very particular way that deals with these things. So when you look out into the world, when you deal with things, you can say, oh, how often did we do this with Trump? Or do we still do this with Trump? All of his followers have daddy issues. I mean, fuck. They call her Mamala. Like the nature of this and how this sort of pulls out and pushes out into everything is kind of a big deal. This is where we start to see Oedipus, because this is a thing that didn't happen prior. Couldn't have prior, because coding and overcoding were the nature of the beast. As we decode, as things fall apart, as this sort of becomes a distributed micrological, microcosmical sort of sets of meaning as capitalism runs, that setup puts us in a position of, well, how do we make sense of it? And because we have these processes where during this conjunctive, where things are coming together, where we're applying the meaning of the thing, where we're putting it into the world, and we're selecting this or that or this or that, this thing that happens, everything gets made by it. As they say, everything is made to begin with Oedipus. By means of explanation, with all more certainty, one has reduced everything to Oedipus by means of application. This is a fascinating process. It is built into the nature of sort of capital as it functions, and built into the nature of how modern day as a thing, we sort of do all of this. Does this make
I have a
sense?
question.
Please, JK.
Yeah. So what's the difference between that kind of the parental figure, authority figure becomes, transformed into a public authority figure of the boss or the president or something like that. How's that different from the despotic? Isn't it that's in the despotic is the same process is occurring?
Different process.
And how's it? Right. And so in capitalism, what is the authority parental figure in capitalism?
Well, we'll get to how that repression comes to form. It comes from the nuclear family and the way that we raise children and the way that we teach people from very early on. Here is the function. I'll get to that in 2 seconds. The difference between this and the way that it works in the despotic, for example, the despotic is from on high, from a godhead, from someone who is the leader, who holds the power of life, death, sex, incest, everything through them and in them. They have all that control. When they give an edict, or one of their minions does, when that edict is given, the meaning of things changes. It becomes over-coded. It allows the code of local to operate. They're not saying that kings came in and then suddenly everyone lost all of their culture. No, quite the opposite. The king would come in and then the locals would find ways to merge their culture with the code now layered above it. The tapestry being written quite literally over on top. Very often this would happen. This setup, this play that's happening is very different than within Capital, where our authority, the respect for authority, the deferring of pleasure and desire and control to authority is placed in children by parents, by the state, by social order, by schools, by the way that children are told they must be, and they must be in order to exist and sort of get out into the world. Happened to us, happened to our parents, happens to children today. No matter how much you may try, these are things that are sort of built into us culturally and everywhere. We see it, whether it's in television shows, the father lays down the rules. Maybe the mother does, but then the father's takes her spot. The roles people play is very, very built in and very, very repressive. In America, and I would say the UK probably as a maybe a little bit even harsher, this very standard nuclear family is the center of where this repression begins. And it is, again, a good thing that is taught over and over and over through repetitive practices as the child's growing until the child replicates it. This thing that happens as we make our way out, on the other side of that, people talk about issues with authority being issues with their father. People openly talk about this. Psychoanalysts, counselors, people talk about this when you talk to them about issues you're having at work. They'll go, oh, interesting. So was your father really rough growing up? And your mom, was it really strict household? Do you have a lot of issues with authority? This is how they talk about these things, if that makes sense. And so as we make our way out, it's a very different beast than just that of overcoding. Does that make sense, JK?
Yeah, it does. So are you saying that in capitalism, the axiomatic is redistributing that symbol of authority, and it's no longer just one, despotic figure?
One axiomatic is doing that. Axiomatics are, again, distributed and sort of created on the fly. There's many of them, and they're always happy to have another created because it's just the rules of the world, and we take them as this larger actual thing. Father, mother, child as a trinary. If you go back and you look at, I'm an old person, so I'll date myself, but it was one of the things that I found very fascinating when gay marriage was being fought for. It wasn't being fought for, like by some, it was, we just want to, why can't we fucking get married? Let us fucking get married. We're people. But on the other side, the more popular argument that worked, and I think what actually allowed like gay marriage to become a thing, was a lot of couples who were same sex going, no, we're the same. See, look, I'm more the man. That's the woman. If we have children, I'm the dad. That's the mom. We are the same. We have a nuclear family. Don't worry about that. That got a lot more people okay with it than I think we want to admit. This normative nuclear family mentality is baked in. If you listen to Ben Shapiro or Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson in their recent interview, the decrying of the destruction of the nuclear family is part and parcel of what they believe. So this is where this repression begins. It's where it starts, and people are aware of it. Nuclear family's job, your job as a parent, you will hear this. I am a parent. You will hear this. You will tell yourself this. You will be told this. Your job is to prepare your kids for the world, good and bad. Now, there's a lot built into that statement, but it kind of means, boy, if your kid isn't ready, what are you a failure of a parent? It's a real question, by the way. I'd love to have someone tell me sometime, because it's really hard to have a free-spirited child because the world does not like that. And you don't want to be the one to crush it. So what do? Well, you're supposed to. You're supposed to crush it. That's what you do. That's your job, is to make sure that they're ready, that they can handle authority, that they're able to be in the place they need to be and handle these things. This is baseline. It's not exciting to say, because I think a lot of us sort of feel it and are aware of this, but this is the thing that happens. Why does this happen? How do we get here? What does it end up doing? Well, one of the things it does is creates this paralogism of application inside all of us, because mom and dad become representative of so many things, not just when other people are talking, but also just how we deal with the world. My kids are at 6 years old. I'm not like sending him to the store on his own. He goes to the store through dad or through mom. This setup that exists, he experiences the world through me. He watches how I respond and he repeats those things. These two, rather than what for most of human history was not two, it was an extended family, aunts, uncles, complexity, a lot more people involved, and not even really a denoted mom or dad, not in that way. That's very much a recent sort of thing, that, oh, that's your dad and mom, and they're the ones who control and own you, and the private little family industry. Yes, Secret Agent Dan. That's a great name. Every day I go to the family factory, make sure all the experiences that come from my child interaction station are up to standard. You say that sarcastically. I have a handful of parents that I've had to be around thanks to my kid that I'm just like, that is it. That's it for them. They think that. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing. So the line here that matters, though, is the role of application versus implication in a code. Application is what we do with meaning. We apply it. We apply this or that symbolic sort of structure. And it's a lot more complex. They go through it earlier. Please go back through our earlier setups. But implication is something that is really different, because we're not applying a certainty. There's an implication socially. And it's the thing that happened in code. Godelier goes through this. I always get the title wrong. Metamorphosis of Kinship goes through this very nicely. The way that meaning sort of had implicative properties, and did even under the king, the implication of a thing, the trying to interpret the side social setup of all of this. It's kind of a lot. It's kind of a lot. But does this make sense so far? Are we following? We good? Generally speaking? Generally. All right.
So Brooks says, in capitalism, with the axiomatic, is it transforming this kind of this parental authority figure and so forth, and distributes, and that kind of way of thinking in a capitalist society, that kind of authority becomes distributed more evenly across, and across the board, across the field.
It real quick, it gets, application is distributed everywhere, but it's distributed samely everywhere.
Sure, right.
I joked two readings ago that capitalism was a bit like a triangle shitting zombie that ate everything and dropped these little triangles. A triangle being mommy, daddy, me. The trifiguration of authority and hierarchy and hegemony that we see built into so many parts of society. There's triangles in a lot of ways that are overlapping, but there's the same thing. It's a paternalistic instinct. Look at how people are treating both Israel and Palestine. Look at how Americans, white Americans, treat black Americans. It's very much still from a almost paternalistic or maternalistic standpoint, rather than as brothers and sisters. That triangulation of how the hierarchy has to be out. You're either mommy, daddy, or me. You're in that position. This exists everywhere. Workplaces, social orders, activist groups, politicians, state-sponsored, whatever. There is that triangle everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Right. But that kind of a triangular, mode is distributed in addition to the quantification, right, of capitalism in terms of
Correct.
your capital is either your labor or your capital,
Yes.
or how much you own. But that kind of quantification, in addition to that triangular, is what makes capitalism unique, right?
Yes. Very much. All of the application one is very, very unique. The other paralogisms, like you're talking about the two parts that are in the conjunctive. Like again, you can kind of like, not that it's a perfect cheat sheet because there's like crossover, but if it's in the conjunctive, the paralogism, it's happening in capitalism, because this is kind of the setup that they've gone with. Yeah, the way that it's built, the way that these things go, the way it's distributed is kind of incredible, actually, as you start sort of going through that. Again, you have to call mom and dad and yourself. You do this for 18 years? Like, how many years are you required to do it? You have particular names and identities and places, and you have to sit in a certain way at a certain part of the table. That's dad's chair. Don't sit in it. Dad's the one who tells us, oh, wait till your dad gets home. Wait till your mom gets home. Oh, I'll have to talk to your father about this. Whatever it is, this setup instills in that child this triangulation of everything, that everything then becomes. If you watch a child grow, you'll see them play mommy, play daddy. Then that's not like a cute stage and then, oh, afterwards we find freedom. That's active repression internally. That's what that is. They're not playing a lot of things. They're playing mommy or daddy, or, oh, daddy does this work. I'm playing daddy at work. I'm playing mommy doing this. I'm playing whatever it is. They're play acting, but that only like works in a certain way. That's not like some random wild shit. That's specific. Then lo and behold, we're all surprised that when we turn into our fucking parents. I mean, some people are, not all of us. Ugh. Yeah. Yeah, let's keep going. Because we will be getting to Oedipus and how all these sort of come together in Oedipus. And again, Oedipus is their critique of psychoanalytic thinking, but don't consider it, again, don't triangulate it and place it specifically. It is the perfect foil for them to be making a much, much greater critique of how we see the world and understand the world, because that's what they're doing here. It's great. To continue. Well, capitalism thus proceeds by means of an axiomatic and not by means of a code. One must not think that it replaces the socius, the social machine, with an aggregate of technical machines. It persists, although they are both machines in the strictest sense, without metaphor. Capitalism's originality resides rather in the fact that the social machine has for its parts technical machines as a constant capital attached to the full body of the socius, and no longer men, the latter having become adjacent to the technical machines, whence the fact that inscription no longer bears directly, or at least in theory, has no need of bearing directly on men. But an axiomatic of itself is by no means a simple technical machine, not even an automatic or cybernetic machine. Bourbaki says as much concerning scientific axiomatics. They do not form a Taylor system, nor a mechanical game of isolated formulas, but rather imply intuitions that are linked to resonances and conjunctions of structures, and that are merely aided by the powerful levers of technique. This holds even truer of the social axiomatic, the way in which the axiomatic fulfills its own immanence, pushes back or enlarges its limits, adds still more axioms while preventing the system from becoming saturated, and functions well only by grinding, sputtering, and starting up again. All this implies social organs of decision, administration, reaction, inscription, a technocracy and a bureaucracy that cannot be reduced to the operation of technical machines. In short, the conjunction of the decoded flux, their differential relations, their multiple schizzes or breaks, require a whole apparatus of regulation whose principal organ is the state. The capitalist state is the regulator of decoded flux as such, insofar as they are caught up in the axiomatic of capital. In this sense, it indeed completes the becoming concrete that seemed to us to preside over the evolution of the abstract despotic or Staat. From being at first the transcendent unity, it becomes immanent to the field of social forces, enters into their service, serves as a regulator of the decoded and axiomatized flows. The capitalist state completes the becoming concrete so fully that, in another sense, it alone represents a veritable rupture with this becoming, a break with it, in contrast to the other forms that were established on the ruins of the Urstaat. For the Urstaat was defined by overcoding and its derivatives. From the ancient city-state to the monarchic state, already found themselves in the presence of flux that were decoded or in the process of being decoded. These flux doubtless had the effect of making the state more and more immanent and subordinate to the actual field of forces, but precisely because the circumstances were not right for these flux to enter into a conjunction, the state could be content to save fragments of overcoding and of codes, to invent others, and by marshaling all its forces was even able to prevent the conjunction from taking place. As for the rest, its project was to resuscitate the Urstaat as far as possible. So much said in here. I want to read the footnote from Barbaki. Invix, I thought you hated me. Invix, why do I like Whitehead? Why do you like Whitehead, Brooks? I mean, I like a lot of people that I don't agree with. Whitehead, I think, has some pretty good writings. I'm a fan of what he wrote when he wrote contextually. Read Whitehead. Whitehead's pretty good. It's not awful. I don't know. It's good stuff. That's good. He's a good writer. I disagree on some things. I agree on a lot of others. Oh, you like Whitehead too? See, there we go, Invix. See, maybe you don't hate me. One of the challenges when we talk about capitalism is it's very easy for people to look out into the world and notice, oh, the king who had an idea of power. Now we have capitalism, industrial capitalism, with machines and computers and all these things taking over. Maybe it's the machines. Maybe that's the thing. We can place the control inside of them. No. We need to be very careful here because we need to be thinking about not replacing the social machine with at-large and aggregate of technical machines. Technical machines are incidental at best. The difference in nature between the two types of machines persist. They're both machines in a strict sense without metaphor. Capitalism, its originality resides rather in the fact the social machine has for its parts technical machines as constant capital attached to a full body of the socius and no longer men, the latter having become adjacent to technical machines. It's very, very nuanced point that they're making here. Very, very nuanced point. I'm trying to think about how to phrase it without fucking it up. The machine of capital, because capitalism is, and its axiomatics and its control is much more imminent to the process of desiring production. We tend to see that those machines are actually just part of that, but they're not what replaced the old socius. They're positions within it that produce constant capital. A man running a machine, this process, let's say we have a business. The cost of the machine itself, constant capital, and the cost to run it, blah, 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 and then the labor attached to it. Labor becomes attached. It's not that man comes in and then figures out a machine. The machine enables constant capital at a very particular value. If I have a really shitty machine that makes, let's say I have a machine that makes widgets, but it's fucking way worse than yours. I have an old-timey hipster fucking crank like steampunk machine, but you have like something made by Hewlett-Packard, like little box that does the same thing. Yours is far more efficient. The constant capital comes first. not the man who runs it. You don't get to do what you want. It's not how it works. The constant capital sits there, and then labor is attached. Constant capital, value, sets up. So the social machine has for its parts technical machines as constant capital attached to the full body of the socius. It's no longer men. It's no longer men attached, investing their organs directly in the king as part of it, as that setup. No, technical machines have taken that. The latter now becomes adjacent. Labor becomes adjacent to it. It's always part of it. You can't get away from it. There's, full automation is, someone's got to push a button. Like, there's always someone who's got to push a fucking button, and someone who's got to fix the thing, and it kind of goes all the way down. Again, we don't talk about it, but constant capital is all the way down. The machine had to be built somewhere. That factory then had machines building that, which had to be sourced and then built. But then the parts for that had to come from metal, had to come from mining, had to come from X, Y, or fucking Z. Wherever it's down, constant capital with labor attached. Labor attached, because it's separated from us. It's not about the craftsman anymore. None of those things. This setup, this place. So what happens is, and this is the big deal, the fact that inscription no longer bears directly on men. Inscription no longer bears on men. The inscription of old, the carving of the flesh for tattoos, the symbolism of it that existed in a very unique way in the Earth Socius. There's no need. Bourbaki is the pseudonym of a group of French mathematicians who were known for their work on the theory of sets and their advocacy of an axiomatic method. We went through Bourbaki specifically when studying this. The axiomatic method, which, quote, allows us, when we are concerned with complex mathematical objects, to separate their properties and regroup them around a small number of concepts. That is to say, using a word which will receive a precise definition later, to classify them according to the structures to which they belong. In this way, they propose to elaborate a language of mathematical formalization capable of integrating different branches of mathematics. The things exist, and now we categorize them, sort them, place them, hierarchize them, and create the rules around which we do that. But that's not the rules with which we make things. It's the rules with which we sort things. There's a difference. It's kind of a huge fucking difference, actually, to get that. These do not form a Taylor system. Taylor system is a mathematical system of management that was built around labor. Nor a mechanical game of isolated formulas, but rather simply intuitions. Intuitions linked to resonances and conjunctions of structures that are aided by the powerful levers of technique. This is not a axiomatic method. The axiom as it is not a built out of experience, simplified, totalized truth. It's not how it works. It's not that process. Instead, it's intuitions linked to resonances. They're guesses, they're vibes. They're built out of vibes, but they pretend not to be. They sort things based on vibes, but they pretend not to be. This holds truer for the social axiomatic. The way which this axiomatic fulfills its own immanence, pushes back, enlarging limits, adds still more axioms while preventing the system from becoming saturated. The way that the social order, we live in a world, if I were to say, that America basically controls a lot of the culture globally and sets the tone for it. That's not a weird thing for me to say. It's not even like chauvinist. I would just say it's accurate. The Marvel Avengers is what it is. There are pockets of people not doing this, even in America, who don't want to do this. It's not the point. Culture is set in a very particular way. Culture is styled in a particular way, set up socially from this central position. How the fuck did that happen? That wasn't the case 50 years ago at all. It wasn't the case even 40 years ago, maybe less 30, no, 30, 20, and certainly now. Certainly now there's a globalized reality behind this as it's constantly expanding, as it's constantly also retracting and unable. Somehow more people are listening to music and buying video games than ever, but they're all making less money than ever. Miraculous, almost. It's the way capital works. It's fascinating. As this axiomatic socially, it's continually pushing out functions by grinding, sputtering, and starting up again. This is the social organs of decision, administration, reaction, inscription, a technocracy and a bureaucracy that cannot be reduced to the operation of technical machines. The people, the labor, the choices, the decisions made, all of these things that are causing the technical machines to break. We are not in a technocracy. We are not in the singularity or the direction of it. This is not, we are at the whim of the machines, and the machines are finding their way forward, even with the fake AI shit that happens today. No. This is the people. It's the people that are building it together. The bureaucracy that exists, decisions, the fits and starts, all of these things, the lack of smoothness of all of it, the lack of perfect efficiency is the people. It's the people. And it's the organs of the people. It's those decisions, it's the labor. And Vic says, is it helpful to think of society as an organic body? It's helpful to think of society at large as in aggregate, less an organic body and more statistical sort of realities, but there is organics in that. It's more complex than that. It's a lot more complex than that. It's tough to say. It's an interesting question. I'll have to think about how to say it. But yeah, it's not purely mechanical. It's not organic either. Correct. Yes. It's a lot to think about. But it is, at large, a superstructure, and particular type of superstructure, the way capitalism operates. This larger thing is a huge mass bureaucracy of technical machines married to people operating them. This setup, this combination. And in that, and it's the reason that at large we can't say it's organic or technical, in that is constant connections. One machine feeding another, building a thing, feeding another, building a thing, feeding another. But that includes humans. That's why we want to talk about and think about them as machinic, not mechanical. There's a difference. Organs are machinic. The desire is machinic. It's not mechanical, because there's a sort of physicalist version of that, but machinic instead, where there's production, sputtering, breaking down, being repaired, putting back up, reconnecting in a multitude that's happening. This they're pushing for. The capitalist state is a regulator of decoded flux insofar as they're caught up in the axiomatic of capital. We talked about this with the setup of the way that decoded flux is effectively desire unbridled. It's the reason that we find ourselves in capitalism. People make something new. This happens at every level, by the way. Someone gets very excited about a new type of music, a new type of art, something that's different, something that just takes things by fire, something that's a new app. And it sounds silly, but yes, a new game, a new movie, new something. New shit comes in. New shit happens. That thing that's going on there, that thing is decoding of old, and it feels a frenzy. It feels a frenzy because it's not defined. It's not written over yet. There's no axiomatic for it. Things may change. Things may shift. Things may become something grand. When AI first landed, the people who were first working on it saw it as emancipatory. Not a joke. They saw it as an emancipatory thing. They were like, holy shit, this will free people. Well, turned out, no, it turns out that's not what capitalism does, as we've talked about the process. But in that moment, there's like getting lost in it. The frenzy, the furor, the building, the creating. Doesn't last long. Not saying we're there anymore, but it's this decoded flux exists until it becomes something we have to axiomatize. We have to say, here's what it is. And it's kind of a brutal, awful process to watch. And the state is part of this. Now, the state at large is part of this in a bunch of different ways. It isn't that we live under a state and the state's what does all this. The state is part of this machine. The state is part of that same bureaucracy. The state is part of all of those things. As they say, in this sense, it indeed completes the becoming concrete that seemed to us to preside over the evolution of the abstract despotic Urstadt. The Urstadt, they use that term as the first state. and is effectively a primordial state that sort of is in wait once it's made. It was emergent. There wasn't like a state that showed up, but it was at some point there was enough people that they decided they needed larger governing body to control, keep things going, make things move. A king took over, someone took over, and that was it. But now we have a state, and we've had a state ever since. And this abstract thing was a big process of becoming concrete. There was state-like things before without that label. Like there were large groups of people, huge, massive conglomerations of people that weren't really a state. Gigantic tribe, not the same fucking thing. There were a lot of really gigantic tribes or multiple groups of tribes, tribes of tribes. It's not really a state, not what we would call one. The Urstaat was that. And so here we have this becoming concrete that the Urstaat is, what it brings, how it brings it forward, and this is what it enforces upon, the decoded flux, the rapid change of things that hasn't quite been axiomatized. In this sense, it completes the becoming concrete that seemed to preside over the evolution. At first, the transcendent unity, it becomes immanent to the field of social forces, enters to their service, serves as a regulator of the decoded and axiomatized flux. The capitalist state completes the becoming concrete so fully that in another sense, it alone represents a veritable rupture with this becoming, a break with it in contrast to the other forms that were established on the ruins of the Urstaat. For the Urstaat was defined by overcoding, and its derivatives, from the ancient city-state to the monarchic state, already found themselves in the presence of flux that were decoded or the process of being decoded. It's not new. It's kind of always happened. The more flux, doubtless, had the effect of making the state more and more immanent and subordinate to the actual field of forces. As more of the codes broke apart and became desire sort of unbridled, just pure change that weren't coded, the state would step in, fix that, take it over. But as more and more happened, the state had to step in more and more. The state stepping in more and more, quite literally, stepping into the immanence of desire, stepping into the immanence of production, the way that it works at every single level. We may see ourselves as part of a sort of federal system in America where it's like far off, or you may be whatever country, this faraway government, but the state is immanent to all production now. It's part and parcel of it, with regulators who are involved in everything, or people at least overseeing, even in places that have no regulation. They're still involved. There's government bureaucracies, bribery, zoning this, police that. They're everywhere. They're not leaving any of it away. Even in libertarian paradises, they've got a whole bunch of different weird, dumb shit. All of those things, the state becomes more and more subordinate to the actual field of forces. But precisely because the circumstances were not right for these flux to enter into a conjunction, the state could be content to save fragments of overcoding and of codes to invent others, and by marshaling all its forces was able to prevent the conjunction from taking place. This last little bit before we made our way to capitalism. The state was able to fight, but slowly became taken as it stepped in. That makes sense. The capitalist state, I'm moving forward. The capitalist state is in a different situation. It is produced by the conjunction of the decoded or deterritorialized flux, is able to carry the becoming immanent to its highest point only to the extent that it is party to the generalized breakdown of codes and overcodings, and evolves entirely within this new axiomatic that results from a hitherto unknown conjunction. Once again, this axiomatic is not the invention of capitalism, since it is identical with capitalism itself. On the contrary, capitalism is its offspring, its result. Capitalism merely ensures the regulation of the axiomatic. It regulates or even organizes the failures of the axiomatic as conditions of the latter's operation. It watches over, directs progress towards a saturation of the axiomatic and the corresponding widening of limits. Never before has a state lost so much of its power in order to enter with so much force into the service of the signs of economic power. And capitalism, despite what is said to the contrary, assumed this role very easily. Sorry, very early. Ugh, I need my tea. And capitalism, starting right there, despite what is said to the contrary, assumed this role very early. In fact, from the start, from its gestation in forms still semi-feudal or monarchic. From the standpoint of the flux of free workers, the control of manual labor and of wages, the standpoint of the flux of industrial and commercial production, the granting of monopolies, favorable conditions for accumulation, the struggle against overproduction. There's never been a liberal capitalism. Action against monopolies goes back first to a time when commercial and financial capital is still allied with the old system of production, when nascent industrial capitalism can secure its production and its market only by obtaining the abolition of such privileges. That the struggle against monopolistic privileges does not imply any struggle against the very principle of state control, providing the state see fit, can be clearly seen in mercantilism, inasmuch as it expresses the new commercial functions of capital that is secured for itself direct interests in production. East India Company, for example. As a general rule, state controls and regulations tend to disappear or diminish only in situations where there is an abundant labor supply and an unusual expansion of markets. I love that great simple statement. That is, when capitalism functions with a very small number of axioms within relative limits that are sufficiently wide. That's the sentence, by the way. This situation ceased to exist long ago, and one must regard as a decisive factor in this evolution the organization of a powerful working class that required a high and stable level of employment and forced capitalism to multiply its axioms while having, at the same time, to reproduce its limits on an ever-expanding scale. The axiom of displacement from the center to the periphery. Capitalism was able to digest the Russian Revolution only by continually adding new axioms to old. An axiom for the working class, for the unions, and so on. But it's always prepared to add more axioms. It adds axioms for many other things besides. Things that are much smaller, tiny even, absurdly insignificant. It has a peculiar passion for such things that leaves the essential unchanged. The state is thus induced to play an increasingly important role in the regulation of axiomatized flux with regard to production and its planning, the economy and its monetarization, and surplus value and its absorption by the state apparatus itself. That little bit in there. First, capitalism didn't come at once. It wasn't, oh my God, we're now in capitalism in like 1890 or some fucking year. Pick your year, it doesn't matter. These are all machines. These are all parts left here, built there, adding here. The processes can be found in a lot of places. Capitalism, we can go back to the very early days of mercantilism. The East India Company, I think, is one of my favorite examples as a history. But even around then, there's the famous story of the guy who bought all of the tulips. He was I think it's Danish, but he's where Sweden is now. I think he was in southern Sweden, today's southern Sweden. Bought a fuck ton of them in order to like make the market crash, like to completely fuck another king. Like insane stories that are 100% very much the same thing that happened today in a really boring way. But that the way it works, the way it starts, and you can kind of look in the world today how we take advantage of the global south, developing countries, developing areas, and how we allow areas to be underdeveloped, because capitalism functions with a very small number of axioms within relative limits that are sufficiently wide. When it first started, it's a very nice way of talking about it. The way that it began to form, what Marx started to see, what Marx critiqued, how these things came about and how they worked. It's some extraordinary commentary there. One sec. My computer's deciding to plug and unplug something, and I don't know what it is. That's fine. We'll just see if I can stop that for now. Let's see. The line, "There has never been a liberal capitalism," is one I very much appreciate. Liberal capitalism presumes markets first, or that free markets, I suppose, without state interference. These things don't really work. There's always been a state as part of it. It's necessary. Depends on what we may call, but there's never been a liberal capitalism. Action against monopolies goes back, first of all, to a time when commercial and financial capital still allied with the old system of production. The actions against the East India Company and what happened with it at a global level. The actions against multiple corporations, of what we would call corporations now, that were state entities that really weren't, but also private. It's fucked up. Some pretty amazing situations there. But this, again, points to what they're talking about, the nature of how axioms exist, how they start simplified, they complexify, they take wherever they need to, they apply themselves, and they become the little rules of every little corner of where it needs to go. Capitalism, think of the fascising, the conservative, the state the fan of the state, these assholes who fetishize such a thing, and how much they're wanting to really go over all of the tiniest little things and create axioms around all of it in order to prevent the further decoding, in order to prevent free-flowing desire, in order to continue and keep all of it in place. There's nothing insignificant, not to them, not to the state either, which they are invested in. Good shit. This next little bit, I am going to read, and I enjoy this. I enjoy this quite a bit. This, I think, speaks a little bit more to where we're at today. It's a little bit more reflective and easier to grasp. It's less theory, more practical. When we talk about social classes, when we talk about class struggle, the one class being in charge of things, whatever it may be, it's always hit me a little wrong, but also right. And I think this paragraph to me speaks to that. And I like how they take it down. So I'm going to continue forward. We'll see what happens. The regulative functions of the state do not imply any sort of arbitration between social classes. That the state is entirely in the service of the so-called ruling class is an obvious practical fact, but a fact that does not reveal its theoretical foundation. The latter is simple to explain. From the viewpoint of the capitalist axiomatic, there is only one class, a class with a universalist vocation, the bourgeoisie. Plekhanov notes that the French school of the 19th century, under the influence of Saint-Simon, should be credited with the discovery of class struggle and its role in history. Precisely the same men who praised the struggle of the bourgeois class against the nobility and feudalism, and who come to a halt before the proletariat and deny that there can be any difference in class between the industrialist or banker and the worker, but only a fusion into one in the same flux as with profits and wages. This proposition contains something other than an ideological blindness or denial. Classes are the negative of castes and statuses. Classes are orders, castes, and statuses that have been decoded. To reread history through the class struggle is to read it in terms of the bourgeoisie as the decoding and decoded class. It is the only class as such, inasmuch as it leads the struggle against codes, merges with the generalized decoding of flux. In this capacity, it is sufficient to fill the capitalist field of eminence. And in point of fact, something new occurs with the rise of the bourgeoisie. The disappearance of enjoyment as an end, the new conception of the conjunction, according to which the sole end is abstract wealth and its realization in forms other than consumption. The generalized slavery of the despotic state at least implied the existence of masters, and an apparatus of anti-production distinct from a sphere of production, but the bourgeois field of eminence, as delimited by the conjunction of the decoded flux, the negation of any transcendent or exterior limit, and the effusion of anti-production inside production itself, institutes an unrivaled slavery, an unprecedented subjugation. There are no longer even any masters, but only slaves commanding other slaves. There is no longer any need to burden the animal from the outside. It shoulders its own burden. Not that man is ever the slave of technical machines. He is rather the slave of the social machine. The bourgeois sets the example. He absorbs surplus value for ends that, taken as a whole, have nothing to do with his own enjoyment. More utterly enslaved than the lowest of slaves, he is the first servant of the ravenous machine. The ravenous machine, the beast of the reproduction of capital, internalization of the infinite debt. I too am a slave. These are the new words spoken by the master, only as personified capital in the capitalist respectable. These are the new words spoken by the master. Quote, only as personified capital is the capitalist respectable. As such, he shares with the miser the passion for wealth as wealth. But that which in the miser is a mere idiosyncrasy is in the capitalist the effect of the social mechanism of which he is but one of the wheels. So, I'll give you a clue who that might be. Fantastic bit. Adore this bit. Really tough to sort of talk about it this way because we like to talk about, we're the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. Us versus them stuff is always fun. I get it. But it's the real question because when we start talking about these caste systems or setups, the nature of capital at large is one of this. And I would love to have anyone who wants to significantly disagree. I'd love to talk through that. As I understand it, even when we talk about someone who's like Jeff Bezos, for example, Jeff Bezos would be someone who has excessive power, but he has excessive power to do anything or to do what capitalism really wants him to do, what the system will allow. As I like to say, if Jeff Bezos tomorrow decided that Amazon should actually be a worker-owned co-op, that he would not be able to, through one method or another, whether they're committing him in an asylum, firing him, and putting someone else in his place, whatever it may be. He only has so much power. The system at large forces and pushes and forces and pushes and forces and pushes. It takes an exceptional amount of very, very particular type of person and situation in order to maintain that. And even then, it whittles away. Costco is actually a really interesting version of this. Costco is not a worker-owned place, but they take very good care of their workers. It's one of the things that the guy who started it made a big deal about. But that's gotten less good over time, and everyone focuses on his line where he's like, change the price of the hot dogs, I'll fucking kill you, which I do appreciate because a good, cheap hot dog's nice to find. But he said that about not just the hot dogs. It's a lot of stuff. But as he lost power, other things changed because the nature of the system is constantly moving forward in a very particular direction towards a very particular constant capital and rate and labor capital and rate. What is the cost? That's it. This is the only thing that matters. Everything else is ancillary. It's a nice to have. It's a fun idea, but it's not really how these things work. It's not really how these things operate. And it's one of those things that really becomes really close. It becomes really close to when we start to sort of play with and talk about these classes. It's very easy to presume a lot of things about choices that other people are making because we would, through resentment, we appreciate when they don't exercise or when they do exercise certain choices. Because again, we're playing with the same application as we talk to them, applying them to a father who makes the choice to punish or not to punish, the mother who is demure and delayed gratification of desire. The way that we view the masters, but they're not masters, they're slaves running other slaves. This interplay, this shift, this change is important as we start talking about the superstructure. If we want, and if you want to be going down the direction of, if you want to go down the direction of having an enemy where you are like, well, capitalism is this brutal, awful force, and the people in charge who control it, you're stuck in a very specific position, that of like the great man theory, that there are people who make choices, not that the material conditions of the world produce people. It produces everyone, even Elon. As much as that sucks to say, even Elon. And Elon is a fascinating pile of shit as a human being because he exemplifies this. He doesn't have any power or control, not in the serious way. Donald Trump, who he recently endorsed, mocked him and laughed about how he groveled and how he could have gotten him on his knees begging for money. And lo and behold, he did. Like, eventually, people bow the knee. Eventually, people do what capital needs. They get in line. They're all in this position. Even Trump, they're all capitalist eunuchs is the phrase that D&G will start to utilize for them. And I've always loved that as well. The capitalist eunuch, the slaves controlling slaves. Always been a fan of that. All right. That was the Dutch. And whatever. God damn it, Rimka. I was talking quickly. The example is still very good. This example is still good. God damn it.
I like this line about the infinite debt. It kind of, has association with Kierkegaard's idea of infinite debt to God. So capitalism is like the God, right?
It kind of plays a little bit of that role because, again, debt by becoming, so first off, debt became infinite to the despot. That's part of the nature of sort of living under a despot, living under a king. The debt is infinite and unrepayable. Capital, though, distributes that debt, and so it instead of being a debt and a fear of death external that can never be repaid, it's now in every action, every productive moment. It's imminent to the process, and so that infinite debt being brought that close, that continuously pushing out, that setup is really fascinating. Yeah, I like it too. I find it very. This ending here to read again and sort of explain is, I think, really, I think, relevant and worth taking time to sort of break down. I'm not going to do a ton of it right now because I do want to get to the next paragraph as well, but we'll do a little bit. It's worth spending time on and really teasing out, because the rest of the book where they go over these things, as well as their other writings where they say a lot of this, especially Guattari, who's written extensively in a lot more practical, direct, political way. This speaks to a lot of what he says. The bourgeois sets the example. He absorbs surplus value for ends that, taken as a whole, have nothing to do with his own enjoyment. More utterly enslaved than the lowest of slaves, he's the first servant of the ravenous machine, the beast of reproduction of capital, internalization of the infinite debt. That line is one of those, this is the thing that's happening. Again, as debt, capital, all of these things move much more eminently towards desire, the closer we are then to capital or in its service, that gulf disappears, and you become one with it. This is almost really, this is where Nick Land sort of sees things going, is we should become one with it, which is fucking just, don't do meth, kids. That's not really the point. But the lines are, I too am a slave. These are the new words spoken by the master. Only as personified capital is the capitalist respectable. Only as one of Forbes' top 10 billionaires. The moment you've fallen out, I think of the Ross, God damn it, what was his name? Russ, the billionaire on Silicon Valley, who was furious. Say again?
Ross Perot?
No. That would be Ross Perot from the real world. There's a character in Silicon Valley, the TV show. I'm much less intelligent. That's the problem. You're assuming I am talking about the real world. I am stupefied by the images of capital. But there's one very rich guy who is furious because he's no longer a member of the 3 Comma Club. And he has to become a member of the 3 Comma Club because there's 3 commas in $1 billion. And the way he talks about it, and everything in his house has like paintings of 3 commas on it. And it's, to me, just the personification of that level of wealth. If you've been around it, it is their entire life. It is how they talk about it. Money personified, capital personified is their existence. It isn't really what they did with the money, which I would almost begrudgingly respect. If Jeff Bezos went, actually, wild hair at my ass, I went and I found the top 20 opera writers in the world and I put them in a room for 5 years. And then I found the best opera singers and I made them write and sing the best opera that ever been made. And I did that for myself and no one else can ever see it. I think he's a dickhead, but kind of appreciate that direction of a thing. That ain't what they do. that would be like interesting. Instead it's, no, I took those guys and I had them write a musical for Apple TV. and now they write musicals for Apple Television. And we got an extra 2-point bump in ratings, which allowed us to, get an extra 3% of funding. And we're reinvesting that actually into our AI division in order to replace those guys with AI so that way we can produce things faster. That is how they talk because that efficiency, that DX, DY thing is their thing. That's their setup. It's brutal. And the line from Marx, I think, only as personified capital is the capitalist respectable. As such, he shares with the miser a passion for wealth as wealth. Miser, Scrooge, from like a guy who just can't help but keep all the money. But well, that is idiosyncrasy. In the capitalist, the effect of a social mechanism of which he is but one of the wheels. And it's an incredible statement. And I think it's an important one. To me, it's an important one because if we're going to talk about the power structures of capital, it's important to understand what decisions and choice means for everyone in it, not just the workers, but also the capitalist class, how these things operate, how they come to understand it, and how they exist. Like everyone, because fucking everyone. There's no such thing as the great man. As the line goes, if you go back and kill baby Hitler, someone else is going to take the place. It's not like that would cure the fucking problem. It'll be said that there is nonetheless a class that rules and a class that is ruled, both defined by surplus value, the distinction between the flux of financing and the flux of income and wages. But this is only partially true, since capitalism is born of the conjunction of the two in the differential relations, and integrates them both in the continually expanded reproduction of its limits. So that the bourgeois is justified in saying, not in terms of ideology, but in the very organization of his axiomatic. There is only one machine, that of the great mutant decoded flux, cut off from goods, and one class of servants, the decoding bourgeois, the class that decodes the castes and the statuses, and that draws from the machine an undivided flow of income convertible into consumer and production goods, a flux on which profits and wages are based. In short, the theoretical opposition is not between two classes, for it is the very notion of class, insofar as it designates the negative of codes, that implies there is only one class. The theoretical opposition lies elsewhere. It is between, on the one hand, the decoded flux that enter into a class axiomatic on the full body of capital, and on the other hand, the decoded flux that free themselves from this axiomatic, just as they free themselves from the despotic signifier, that break through this wall of a wall, and begin flowing on the full body without organs. The opposition is between the class and those who are outside the class, between the servants of the machine and those who sabotage it or its cogs and wheels, between the social machine's regime and that of desiring machines, between the relative interior limits and the absolute exterior limit, if you will, between the capitalists and the schizos in their basic intimacy at the level of decoding, in their basic antagonism at the level of the axiomatic. Whence the resemblance in the 19th century socialist portrait of the proletariat between the latter and a perfect schizo. It's an important note in the translation. They talk about le hors classe. It's a outcast or outlaw, those outside the class. Outside, outlaw, outside the law. Outlaw in English has connotations very particular, but it's meant to be outside. So when we say the opposition between the class and outside the class, this is the difference. It is not between classes within capitalism. There's the class, and then the class that's not part of a class or any class. Outside the class. The servants and those who sabotage it. Those last few lines, I'm not going to go over why. Don't take it as go be schizo and random. It's not the fucking point. It's not it. It's not it. It's not it. I'm not going to explain it 1,000 times. Just don't do that. But it's a really great little piece here. They go through the classes. They go through the setup, the traditional class structure. And they have a very particular way of talking about it. As they say, it will be said there is nonetheless a class that rules and a class that is ruled. We can see this. Don't you understand, Brooks? Don't you understand, Deleuze, Guattari? Look, there's the capitalists who own and have all the capital and all the power. They're the ones in charge, the elites. And then there's the working class, the schlub down the street and me. That's the setup. It's like, no, not really. Not really. Capitalism is born of the conjunction of the two in a differential relation. It's born of... Capitalism is born of the capitalist class and the workers. That's without, what the fuck happens if you don't have those? Capitalism is born of this. This is the class. They're conjuncted. They're not two different things. If there were no workers, there'd be no fucking capitalists. If there were no capitalists, there would be no workers. The nature of capitalism within Marx is that one exploits the other, and they have what you might call a singular relationship. Very simple, very special. You need constant capital from the capitalists, you need labor from the proletariat. You bring them together, we kind of have, it's partially true because we have the two, but no, not really. It integrates them both. They're integrated. They're together. They're really one machine, one version of production. The bourgeois is justified in saying, not in terms of ideology, but the very organization of the axiomatic, there is only one machine, that of the great mutant decoded flux, cut off from goods, one class of servants, the decoding bourgeois, the class that decodes castes and statuses and that draws from the machine an undivided flux of income convertible into consumer and production goods, a flux on which profits and wages are based. In short, the theoretical opposition is not between two classes, for it is this very notion of class, insofar as it designates the negative of codes, that implies there is only one class. It's a hell of a... go read Symbolic Logic. It's a great book. It's a hell of a lead that they've got going through here, but it's a very particular line you can follow if you're paying attention. The setup is not in opposition between the two. We can talk about the Marxist sort of implications of this later, but that's one. But capitalism brings them together in a very unique way. And really what it is, it's the notion of class insofar as it designates the negative of codes that implies there is only one class. When we talk about the caste systems of old, really this is what we're moving into when we talk about the two classes. Designates the negative of codes. The theoretical opposition actually lies elsewhere. It's not that these two are opposed. It's if workers have a bunch of rights and it's a great union shop, that can lead to the same shit. Power and structure and setup within capital work particularly the same, because these things are ultimately one class. It's not the setup. We need to look elsewhere to find where there's actually this opposition. It is between, on the one hand, the decoded flux that enter into a class axiomatic on the full body of capital. So that decoded flux, there's an axiomatic, I am the working class. There is a working class and there is a capitalist class. There's an elite. There's a worker. There's an elite and a worker class. That's on the one side, is this axiomatic, is accepting this axiomatic, accepting this application. My dad was working class. This is what working class means. I'm part of the working class, or I'm part of the capitalist class because this is what my dad is. My dad said it this way. This axiomatic on one side. And on the other, the decoded flux that free themselves from this axiomatic, just as they free themselves from the despotic signifier that break through this wall and this wall of a wall and begin flowing on the full body without organs. The destruction of that axiomatic. When we talk about people who are free of the system, when we talk about what actually is happening, it's people who won't accept the structure and people who do. If you do, that's the bourgeois. If you don't, that's the opposition. Desiring machines are over here. Schizos are over here, as they say. The schiz, people who have that type of existence, people who do not accept axiomatics and instead apply problematics, instead view things and take things differently. These are the oppositions that exist. The servants of the machine, those who sabotage it or its cogs and wheels. The guys at OpenAI that are trying to utilize AI and make it basically to the highest bidder, the most expensive fucking nightmare thing that could ever exist that no one could ever have at home, versus the people kind of, and I would say lightly, doing God's work, if there is such a thing, that are making home versions of this that don't track data or don't collect and are actually finding some very interesting uses for. Not great, but something. People who are building open source code against the large giant beasts. People who are building art or videos that are subversive, that break the sort of norm. People who write and try to break that. People who exist socially and run free food kitchens, free food drop-offs, anything that just breaks that setup that exists outside of it. Bourgeois and the opposition, not bourgeois and proletariat. Bourgeois and the opposition. Between the capitalists and the schizos, in their basic intimacy at the level of decoding, in their basic antagonism at the level of the axiomatic, whence the resemblance in the 19th century socialist portrait of the proletariat between the latter and a perfect schizo, someone who's completely outside of it. Again, they're not, it's one of the challenges of this. They are not idolizing that system. They're not turning it into a totalization. The process, existing with the process, in what Eugene Holland calls permanent revolution. That setup. And here's why I love this. We're going to finish. Don't worry. We're keeping going. The next paragraph, I think, hits at this very nicely. Very nicely. That is why the problem of a proletarian class... Oh, I fucking missed a bunch of text messages. Oh, you guys are having good conversation. Good, not for me. You never know if someone's yelling at me. That is why the problem of a proletarian class belongs first of all to praxis. The task of the revolutionary socialist movement was to organize a bipolarity of the social field, a bipolarity of classes. Of course, it is possible to conceive a theoretical determination of the proletarian class at the level of production, those for whom surplus value is extorted, or at the level of money, income, or wages. But not only are these determinations sometimes too narrow and sometimes too wide, but the objective being they define as class interest remains purely virtual, so long as it is not embodied in a consciousness that, to be sure, does not create it, but actualizes it in an organized party suited to the task of conquering the state apparatus. If the movement of capitalism, in the interplay of its differential relations, is to dodge any assignable fixed limit, to exceed and displace its interior limits, and to always effect breaks of breaks, then the socialist movement seems necessarily led to fix or assign a limit that differentiates the proletariat from the bourgeoisie, a great cleavage that will animate a struggle, not only economic and financial, but political as well. Now, the meaning of just such a conquest of the state apparatus has always been and remains problematical. That's not probably the word they used. A supposed socialist state implies a transformation of production, of the units of production and the economic rationale. But this transformation can only take place starting from an already conquered state that finds itself confronted by the same axiomatic problems of extraction of a surplus or surplus value, of accumulation and absorption of the market and monetary reckoning. Consequently, either the proletariat prevails and transforms the apparatus in conformity with its objective interest, but these operations are carried out under the domination of its consciousness or party vanguard, that is, for the benefit of bureaucracy or technocracy that stands in for the bourgeoisie as the great absent class, or the bourgeoisie keeps its control of the state and is free to secrete its own techno-bureaucracy and, above all, add a few more axioms for the recognition of the proletariat as a second class. It is correct to say that the alternative is not between the market and economic planning, since planning is necessarily introduced in the capitalist state and the market subsists in the socialist state, if only as a monopolistic market of the state itself. And in effect, how does one define the true alternative without assuming all these problems resolved beforehand? Really, really like this paragraph. I think it's a great paragraph. This is assigning what I think are a lot of the problems with the current sort of rationale around things. Do we want to talk about China as being the future of communism? Probably not. They directly talk about this. The state basically becomes the bureaucratic thing that everything's done for. This is what happened to Russia. This happens for a lot of states. That's their thing. So what's the difference? Oh no, it's a planned economy versus a free economy. But they're all planned fucking economies. What the fuck are you talking about? They're all this. It's capitalism isn't free. Like even in a libertarian paradise, they have a age of consent that stops at 18. Like they're going to have rules and setup and production and setups. Like you can't get away from these things. It's just silly. This isn't how it goes. So you have these two sides that are supposedly fighting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. How are we to do anything? How does one define an alternative without assuming all of these problems are resolved beforehand? This is the challenge. All of these things need to be fixed before we can move on, before the next setup, before whatever theoretically is following capital. That's it. What the fuck? It's fantastic. I love this. The lineup they put. Let's say we have revolution. On one side, the proletariat prevails, transforms the apparatus in conformity with its objective interest. It knows it's the working class. It ensures everything changes to benefit the working class, the proletariat. Happy days. But these operations are carried out under the domination of its consciousness or party vanguard. That is, for the benefit of a bureaucracy or technocracy that stands in for the bourgeoisie as the great absent class. This is the same structure. We've just named it something new now. Or worse, the bourgeoisie keeps its control of the state and is free to secrete its own techno-bureaucracy and above all, add more recognition for the proletariat as a second class. That's a reference to May 68, if I've ever seen one. Hey, look, you had a big revolution. Oh, look, we got to care about the working class. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. We're gonna talk through this. We're gonna care about you. Don't worry. The state will happily do that shit. So what the fuck? We ended up in the same position with a handful of extra axioms, or we end up with the pro-bourgeoisie, proletariat who's in charge and everything done for them. Same structure. Still fucking capital. One of the great failures, Zizek, I think, said it. I really do appreciate this line from Zizek. There's a few, he says some things on occasion still decent. So one of the great tragedies is actually that the Russian Revolution went the way it did, because it kind of put us in a position of, like, that's the alternative to American imperial capitalism. That's the direction, because we don't really have a lot of other archetypes to go from. So what happened? This is the challenge. This is the same challenge. And yes, Philo, this is a stream of Anti-Oedipus. We're reading Anti-Oedipus paragraph by paragraph and talking through it and getting yelled at and talking through it. So the question is, in effect, it ends, how does one define the true alternative without assuming all these problems resolved beforehand? The immense accomplishment of Lenin and the Russian Revolution to have forged a class consciousness consonant with the objective being or interest of the class, and as a consequence to have imposed on the capitalist countries a recognition of class bipolarity. But this great Leninist break did not prevent the resurrection of a state capitalism inside socialism itself any more than it prevented classical capitalism from getting round the break by continuing its veritable mole work, always effecting breaks of breaks that allowed it to integrate into its axiomatic sections of this newly recognized class, while throwing the uncontrolled revolutionary elements, no more controlled by official socialism than by capitalism itself, further into the distance, to the periphery or into the enclaves. Thus, the only choice left was between the new terroristic or rigid axiomatic, quickly saturated, of the socialist state and the old cynical axiomatic, all the more dangerous for being flexible and never saturated, of the capitalist state. But in reality, the most direct question is not that of knowing whether an industrial society can do without a surplus, but in reality, the most direct question is not that of knowing whether an industrial society can do without a surplus, without the absorption of a surplus, without a commodity exchanging and planner state, and even without an equivalent of the bourgeoisie. It is evident both that the answer is no, and that in these terms the question is poorly put. Nor is it a question of knowing whether or not class consciousness, embodied in a party or a state, betrays the objective class interest to which a kind of potential spontaneity would be ascribed, suffocated by the agents claiming to represent that interest. Sartre's analysis in Critique de la raison dialectique appears to us profoundly correct, where he concludes that there does not exist any class spontaneity, but only a group spontaneity. Whence the necessity for distinguishing groups in fusion from the class, which remains serial, represented by the party or state. And the two do not exist on the same scale. This is because class interest remains a function of the larger molar aggregates. It merely defines a collective preconscious that is necessarily represented in a distinct consciousness that, at this level, does not even present any grounds for asking whether it betrays or not, alienates or not, deforms or not. The problem is situated there, between unconscious group desires and preconscious class interests. It is only starting from this point, as we shall see, that one is able to pose the questions issuing indirectly therefrom, concerning the class preconscious and the representative forms of class consciousness, and the nature of the interests and the process of their realization. Reich always comes back to us with his innocent standards, claiming the rights of a prior distinction between desire and interest. Quote, "The leadership has no task more urgent, besides that of acquiring a precise understanding of the objective historical process than to understand, A, what are the progressive desires, ideas, and thoughts which are latent in people of different social strata, occupations, age groups, and sexes, and B, what are the desires, fears, thoughts, and ideas, traditional bonds, which prevent the progressive ideas from developing?" The leadership has a tendency rather to reply, "When I heard the word desire, I pull out my gun." Reich's great. Flossinor, thank you very much for the super chat. Working on a video essay on madness, and I've been reading this work. Thank you for breakdown. Do you have links to previous streams? Literally, if you're in YouTube, find the playlist. Like, this is our third time reading Anti-Oedipus, so there is no shortage of me. At first, by the way, the earlier it goes, worse readings. People have found them useful because it turns out my real stupid questions led other people to answering very, very well. But One sec. OBS disconnected. Wonderful. That's my favorite thing. And it should be back. Wonderful. Drew, Donald Trump. I don't answer my phone. So just don't answer your phone. Just become more alienated. Accept it. Stop getting robocalls. It's the best way. Is just if you just don't answer your fucking phone. Super easy way to not get robocalls. Plus, if they don't leave a voice message, who cares, right? Like, if it wasn't important enough to leave a voice message, you don't give a shit. There is a playlist of our second AO reading, by the way, Karasu. It is in there. It's there. There's a lot said here. And we're going to kind of probably spend the end of the stream, the next like 5-10 minutes, going over it. First off, and it's not a thing I'm going to like debate as a thing, but the resurrection of state capitalism inside of Russia is not a debated thing as far as I'm aware. Some people really disagree, but it's not a debated thing amongst historians and economists. It was capitalism, and the reasons for production, what caused production, was just capitalism. Like it's just capitalism. It wasn't despotism. They didn't control things in that way. They had a bureaucracy with incentive structures, and capital made the choices of where things needed to go and how industry functioned. It's silly to think otherwise. It's very much what China does too. They plan in a different way, and they have a large bureaucratic engine in a way America doesn't, but it's still the same shit underneath. There's a wonderful documentary I've recommended. One sec. It's just a documentary about like kind of the production of things in China. And it's a silent documentary. It's one of my favorite types, where it's just like video of slices of lives of people. I watch it on occasion. We've watched it here a few times as well. One sec. It's always frustrating. Title, and we're gonna go genre. What are my documentaries? Ascension. It is about the pursuit of the Chinese dream, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, because it's Jessica Kingdon, and the way that she goes about it is really kind of brilliant. She's done a handful like this, but it's just like a camera sitting somewhere watching a thing, and that's it. Like, the whole thing is just this, and the shots are beautiful. Like, it's stunningly filmed. The cinematography is amazing, but it's area where people are getting recruited. There's a bunch of buses, and they're going to head off to work for a month at a factory in various areas outside of Chengdu, and there's like, these guys have like bullhorns, and they're like, we pay X amount, no tattoos allowed, no piercings, dormitories are 6 per room, everyone gets a bed, or 2 people share and it's everyone like advertising for this, and people are there with suitcases like all day, smoking and sitting and waiting for a job they want. And then that goes into, well, like actually following them, and then sitting in the factory, and then, well, what's it like to have money? What do they spend it on? And how does it go? Because it's a very different beast of a world than I think in the West people have experienced. I've been fortunate to spend time in China, and it is, it's Westerny versus what it was, but it's very much a foreign country, and it's kind of amazing that way. There's a very famous shot from it that did get passed around of water parks in China and how packed they are. It's a viral video that's gone viral. Like, it's a GIF I think people send of like, just as far as you can see, there's no water. It's people like up against each other, and they're all shirtless or in bikinis or one pieces. And then just like the wave of them up and down, you can't even see the fucking water. It's insane. Like shit like that, just what their life is. But that thing that they're going through, it's capitalism. That's like underneath it. It's still capitalism. It's organized. It's set up. And as they made their way through, this is what they're talking about. In reality, the most direct question is not that of knowing whether industrial society can do without a surplus, without absorption, without a commodity. even without equivalent to the bourgeoisie? Obviously, they know. That, in these terms, the question is poorly put. It's not a question of knowing whether or not class consciousness, embodied in a party or state, betrays the objective class interest. Oh, they see, no, China's not doing it right because they betray class interest. No, China does it right because they don't betray class interest. Blah, 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 blah. And it's bullshit. This is not true. Sartre's line is spot on here. There does not exist any class spontaneity, but only group spontaneity. And this is where we start making our way. If you watched my video piece on groupuscules, the focus on the group, groupuscules is, by the way, a lovely term I'm going to start using. It's a terrible term. We need to think of a new word. I will publicly thank anyone who comes up with a better word than groupuscules, because it sounds to me like a skin condition. But the idea of groups in fusion is one of these things, this idea of we are spontaneously, consistently part of groups, whether we're aware of or not. We're constantly moving through them. And all these groups in fusion, the classes, these are sort of invested in the state. They don't work in the same scale. They don't apply to the same scale. So for Reich and everyone else, the comment is really focused on, if you don't know Reich, he's kind of the question that is about this. Why do people desire their own repression? He lived through Nazi Germany and got to experience a whole bunch of stuff. And he was fascinated by people wanting to be repressed. And anyone in America is watching that same exact thing fucking unfold. Why do people want their own repression? Reich has this whole bunch of stuff, but there's the line here that they really go with is a big deal. And I want to focus on the quote. Leadership has no task more urgent, besides that of acquiring a precise understanding of the objective historical process, than to understand, A, the first one, what are the progressive, the forward-thinking, the pushing forward ideas, desires, and thoughts latent in people of different social strata, occupations, ages, groups, and sexes. What are the things people want out of the world that a leader can do? The progressive ideas, changing the practical movement of politics, that thing. What are they that people have that are latent? They're not spoken. But also, what are the desires, fears, and thoughts and ideas which prevent those from developing? It's a fantastic line. What do people truly desire? What is within them, and what is blocking that? And the line from D&G at the end here, they add, leadership has a tendency rather to reply, when I hear the word desire, I pull out my gun. Because they know desire destroys the state. Fantastic setup. Sorry, 61. Spot on. It's from Sartre's quote. It's kind of oddly fucked up with the way that it's formatted on my PDF, so it doesn't show it. But the line, whence the necessity from distinguishing groups in fusion from the class which remains serial, represented by the party or the state. This is from Sartre directly, from that piece, critique of dialectical reason. So yes, thank you, 61. Spot on. And again, the setup, like Dublos saying, the spontaneous groups that sort of show up, change leadership on a dime. They have cluster up with ease. They move there. Grouping is almost an emergent thing. But again, we like to apply this after image in order to say, oh no, I am working class. I've been selected. My father is this. The application of things puts us in these, but that's our pre-conscious class interest. It's not our unconscious desires. This is not that. This isn't even where we may or may not end up. These are really complex interactions of things. And Reich's question is the one that matters at the base. What is it for you, for anyone, for everyone, every class, every group, every designated group you can consider? People who have disabilities, white people, black people, wealthy, poor, just grab a group. It's fine. Doesn't matter. Grab a group. And what are the desires latent in this group generally? What are the things they're not saying that they want, the latent, progressive, what are the things they want changed? Why aren't these coming to formation? Why aren't, for example, stunning lines, why are Trump people and voters deeply anti-worker and anti-union, yet also pro-worker somehow? And because they're not, we know they're not, but they are. Great interaction happened on Fox the other day. The Teamsters Union chief, who's this absolutely, if you were to see a picture, if you were to ask an AI to draw a picture of a guy, it'd be this dude. He's like this gruff giant, big white beard, guy who has fat rolls on his neck, the kind of guy you never get in a fight with, like that. And he's got this gruff voice, and he went off on Fox, like management's doing this and this and this and this. And he turned on Fox in the middle of the interview. Well, they were there to support him, and then they switched. They switched really fast to calling him an unhinged union leader. These people, by the way, a lot of them voting Trump, the Teamsters, voting for Fox News' candidate. But why? What are these things that are latent in them that they're not doing? And why are these things latent? These are the questions that we need to be asking. This is Reich's question. This is the setup when we start actually talking about it, because ultimately we know the state has no interest in pulling out people's desires. They want to repress them. They get their gun. So what do we do? How do we do? And that's where AO, the rest of AO actually is, from here, is kind of that. It's breaking it down a little further and then moving its way into what we can do and how we can make those changes, leading into 1,000 Plateaus ultimately. With that, it's 2:00. That's my 2 hours. It has been lovely as always. Really, I hope I did a acceptable job going through these. The middle of this week, I'm going to be in a couple days. I'm going to do an evening stream for those of you who this is a little midday for some people. I know they watch and then they yell at me that they want stuff at night. So we're going to do a little bit more. And then I've got another video hitting this week. So this will be fun. Please, if you haven't, join us at Discord if you'd like. It's one of the things that I know we can do, especially felix, which is not a terrible name. I'm a fan of that. Head discord.gg/DGQC. We're happy to help anyone understand any of these things or make their way through. It's an amazing community, and all of you who are here in the Discord, you know I love you all, and I think you're amazing. Highlight of my week, but generally a wonderful community to talk through all of this and support people making their way to learning. And if you like what I do and how we're setting up, please head to our Patreon, support us. It's the easiest, best way, and we'll make it through a little bit further. And yes, Drew, I will at some point be watching for the stream. The tough part is like evenings, because I got the 2 kids. Evenings is a bit of a bear, so it kind of happens when it happens, kind of thing. I'll do my best to say in advance where I can, though, and what we can do there, because it's entirely possible that I can't. I don't know. But it's entirely possible I fucked that up completely. So, but other than that, I think that's going to be, mostly it. I think let's see, we've got, what do we got here? The end of the stream. Yeah, we're going to send you over to, we'll be sending you over probably to Sunday, who I think is going to end up wanting to bug me and have me on. So we'll do that. But other than that, thank you guys, and we will chat soon. Thank you so much.